What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Hope everyone had a great weekend. I'm recording this podcast. It's now on a Wednesday, but it happens to be the Wednesday after Father's Day. So here in Australia on Sunday, we had Father's Day. So number one thing is happy Father's Day, dads. I hope you enjoyed the day. Hope you got to spend it with your family. Hope you got to enjoy it with your family. And I hope you got to spend some time to reflect and appreciate what we get to do as dads, which is have influence on our children's life, and we just get to be part of it. I know for me personally, if I'm ever feeling down and I'm feeling like, the world is too much, sometimes just sitting there and watching my kids and being in awe of watching them grow and watching them develop and, really just being thankful for the fact that I get to be part of it. Like, I've got two amazing little human beings and my wife as well, who is also amazing, but these two little human beings that I'm responsible for helping them grow up, helping them become their own person. And really just, I get to be there and I get to observe and help and guide them. And it's a privilege and it's an honor. And it's something that every single day I am extremely thankful for. So I hope you as a dad, as a fellow dad, whether you're listening to this or watching this, got to have a great day and, got to appreciate what it is that we get to do. And when I was sitting down and I was writing out what I wanted to cover off on this week's podcast, it may not be a very long one because the concept of what I want to go through is fairly simple and fairly straightforward, and something I've spoken about quite a number of times over the 30 plus episodes that we've now done of this podcast. And how I come around to it was I had the idea that what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a podcast on things that I've learned from my dad. And I started to think about, was there some sayings that he used to use all the time that, have stuck with me? And there's a few little ones. One of the big ones that I remember, and I remember vividly, just to digress for a little bit, is it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And me being shorter and smaller in stature, that's been one that's always stuck with me. And it's become a little bit more, it was said around, sporting things like doing sport and playing football, but it's kind of become something that, like that saying in life, has become something that, especially in today's day and age where we've got a lot of us have a fight on our hands with something that is much, much bigger than us. And it's something that I take on board to try and keep moving forward and keep fighting and keep doing what I need to in order to provide for my family. But I started thinking about this, and my dad he's a quiet guy, right? Like he's not a man of many words at all. And when I sat down and thought about it, I could think about little things here and there, but the biggest thing that kept coming to mind was probably one of the biggest things I learned from my dad was work ethic. And it had nothing to do with what he said, but everything to do with what he did. Because all through his kids and from, some of my youngest memories, he would get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning. He wouldn't get home till like 6, 7 o'clock at night. And then there'd be nights where he'd sit down in his office and he'd continue to work well past the time that we went to bed. And, this was what he did. And he would do that day in, day out, week in, week out. And the reason he would do it would be for his family, because he wanted to try and provide a life for us that he wasn't able to have as a kid. And obviously there's a lot of things that, when you're a kid, go through your mind, and you don't grow to appreciate the actions of your parents, I don't believe, until you actually become a parent yourself. And when I was sitting down and I was thinking about what I was going to talk about on this podcast, and I was trying to think about 5 sayings and things like that, I really just kept coming back to the actions and what he did, which is why the name of this podcast is, words are powerful, but actions speak louder. Because when I was thinking about this, I started to think about my kids, and if they're sitting down when they're my age in, 25, 30 years time, and they're thinking about, maybe they're on a platform like this and they're trying to put out some information or talk to their other kids about like, hey, what did dad teach you? What are the biggest things that you got from your dad? I started to think, you know what? It's probably going to be around my actions that they're going to be the things that they remember, because words are fleeting. And while words can be powerful, they can, the right words at a particular time can project us to do something that we never thought we could do in the moment. They can also go the other way. They can be quite hurtful, even though they're just words, and they can send us into a dark hole. But when it's all said and done, and later on down the track, the things that we're going to be remembered by are going to be less about the words that we said and more about the actions that we did. And especially when it comes to our kids, and when our kids are younger, we know that they are going to, doesn't matter how many times you tell them something, if you are doing something and you are trying to get them to stop doing that action that they see you do over and over again, you're fighting a losing battle, because they're not listening to the words, they're seeing their actions. And when I've sat down and I've retrospectively looked at, what did I learn from my parents and what did I learn from my father, a lot of that has to do with his actions. It has less to do about what he told me, and it has more to do with what I've observed and where I've, following in his footsteps from an action point of view. And the thing is, looking at it from that perspective, I really don't know. Words do make a difference, and it's important to communicate with our children and communicate that with them in a way that they understand. But when it's all said and done, they're going to follow in our shadow. They're not going to follow down the path of the words that we have told them. So from the point of view of what we are doing, yes, it's important to communicate. It's important to let them know. But if that what you are telling them doesn't align with what you are doing, the words become meaningless, especially when they get removed 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years down the track. Because those words can stick, but they'll only stick if the action is there, or being observed to back them up. And with my kids, with everyone's kids, this has been something that pretty common theme when I talk to a lot of parents. And, you talk to people, and I think if you sit down and you think about like, what are some of the things that you learned from your father or your parents, and really have a think about it, and think about like, those things that I learned, were they their words, or were they their actions, or were they a combination of both? And it's really important to remember that, like, what we do is going to probably stick with our kids for a lot longer than what we say. And if we are not happy with ourselves, or we're not willing to take a risk on ourselves, we're not willing to push through some adversity. And I've said this in one of my previous podcasts, that one thing that kind of determines whether I'm going to, stop doing something, or I'm going to keep moving forward, or whether I do or don't do something, cop out of it, is, would I be happy with if I was telling my kids that I can or can't, like the reason why I stopped doing this, am I going to be proud of that reason, or am I going to be happy with communicating that reason to them? Or would I be happy if they took the same action that I'm about to take now? And if the answer is no, I really rethink that action that I'm about to take, because that's not setting the example. That is basically doing something because it feels good for me in the moment. It doesn't show grit. It doesn't show determination. And sometimes working through uncomfortable things, even though we feel like we want to give up, is a really important thing. And when our kids see that, they're going to emulate that, especially if it is a behavior that we keep doing and that keeps reoccurring. And there's all these things that we can just show by example, as men showing our sons, one thing that when I was a kid, you didn't show emotion. You just kind of bucked up and you got on with it. Whereas now, I want to show my son that it is okay to show emotion. Yes, there are going to be times where you need to put your head down and ass up, and you need to keep moving forward. You need to work through some adversity, but it's okay to be upset. It's okay to it's okay to cry. It's okay to, feel these emotions. These aren't things that need to be suppressed. So me telling him that is one thing, but me showing him that is an entirely different thing. And that's something for him that when he gets 10, 15, 20 years down the track, if I'm not doing it and I'm only telling him that, there's probably a pretty good chance he may remember it, but he might forget it as well. Whereas if I'm showing him that, there's a better chance that that's going to stick for him. So pretty short one today. The concept is, as I was going through thinking about what we were going to do, what I was going to talk about today, I wanted to talk about things that I'd learned from my dad. And I'm going to do that on another podcast. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the things that I learned, the big lessons that have stuck with me long term, have been around his actions and not necessarily his words. And that's the thing that I want to get across. I want to, really communicate with everybody, like lead by example. If you lead by example, your kids are going to pick up on that. Whereas if it's just words and you're just talking at them, I have a feeling that 10, 15 years down the track, there's going to be less of that remembered rather than them seeing you do those things that you want them to do. Being kind, them seeing you being emotional, being vulnerable, being physical, like prioritizing your physical health. Obviously, for me, that's a big one, and being there for them, being happy, being the dad that you want them to be able to see is important rather than just telling them that they should be doing these things, because words with action are going to, if they're aligned, they're going to stick with people. Whereas words that are different to the actions aren't going to stick. They're going to notice the actions before they understand the words. And I know I don't want to be, and I'm sure nobody listening to this wants to be, a do as I say, not as I do parent. You want to lead by example and you want to be better. And that's why we're all here. And I hope, that kind of tells you something a little bit about where you should be moving, what you should be doing. And I know it's a little bit out there. The concept is not quite, there's probably not real any actionable steps that I can give you after this. It's just something a thought that's been on my mind, something that I just wanted to put out there, because I think all too often we get so wrapped up in telling our kids things, and we forget that they're probably just following our lead sometimes with the actions that they're taking, the emotions that they're exhibiting, anger, loss of control, yelling. They're probably just emulating what we're doing, not what we're saying. And when I look back on the valuable things that I learned from my parents, it all comes down to the actions, not necessarily what they said. So hopefully you enjoyed those thoughts around words. Words are powerful, but actions do speak louder. If you enjoyed it, share it around. If you have any thoughts on this concept, obviously just reach out. I'd love to have a conversation with somebody around this and their thoughts on how actions impact parenting more than probably what words do, especially in those early ages. So, reach out, let me know how you're going, share it around. Make sure you've liked, shared, subscribed on all the podcast platforms. We're on YouTube as well now with this, Facebook, Instagram, and that's about it. So thanks for joining us for another week. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.